Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC television podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Casey. I hope everyone's doing well today. I feel pretty good myself. So we have 4 new segments lined up. So today, instead of kicking it off with Manifest, we'll actually be talking about the first episode of The Circle. The Circle just dropped on Netflix. It's actually season 2, so you don't need to watch season 1 because it's a reality competition. After that, we will then be moving to Manifest, discussing last week's episode. By the time this airs, there will be another episode out. Then I'll be going over the first 4 episodes of The Queen's Gambit. I gave a little brief overview last podcast. And then we'll also be going through the first 3 episodes of The Wilds, which is yet another one that I went through the kind of brief overview of our last podcast. All right, so just kind of jumping right into it, we have The Circle, Season 2, Episode 1. So, for anyone who might not know what The Circle is, which is a possibility, it is a Netflix-produced reality competition. The idea of it is all based around social media. And it originally started over in the UK. What's new with that? Americans taking yet again another, English show. And ever since the American version has come out and has dropped on Netflix, it has blown up. Now, I guess you could really say it's the same thing with the UK version, because the UK version's still really new as well. I think they were just finishing up with season 2 of the UK version when the first season of the American version was about to come out on Netflix. So then I believe also, kind of following this whole train, there is a Brazilian one. I think there might even be a French one, and who knows, there's probably even more out there, which it's also spawned a load of ORGs on the internet as well. For those who don't know, that's online reality games, which are pretty big, or are at least getting even bigger than they've been before. But anyway, so yeah, The Circle is all focused around social media, where you have, I believe generally speaking, they will release 8 contestants. Each contestant gets their own private apartment, and each of those contestants have to decide how they're going to portray themselves on The Circle, which is its own social media platform. The big thing is the players all get to choose, do I play as myself or do I play as a catfish? It also kind of seems a little crazy trying to explain this, but for anyone that doesn't know what a catfish is, it's all about misrepresenting yourself to lure someone in. Generally, you might pose as a female to get some guy, or a male, or female to female, whatever. I mean, it's all kind of the same. You're just pretending to be someone you're not in hopes to attract someone. So, The Circle Season 1 Had a couple catfishes. They're all very entertaining, very likable cast last season, which was something I wasn't expecting. I originally put on The Circle as something to fall asleep to, because typically while I watch a number of reality competitions and even play in reality competitions online, I don't actually really like most reality shows and or reality competitions. Most of them come off extremely vapid, and so I never meant to actually watch the first season of The Circle, but that night I think I was having trouble sleeping, so I was just like, I'll put something on in the background, because normally I do not have my TV on or lights on or stuff like that. When I go to bed, it's lights off, fan on, but anyway, so I put it on in the background, and then a couple people really caught my attention with season 1, and I was like, wait, what? And so then I perked up and I started watching, and I was just like, ugh, as aggravating and as annoying as this kind of is, this is also kind of interesting, especially given that it is a fresh new reality competition, and I kind of wanted to see how it developed. And while it was fun on a level, it was not very strategic. Which reminds me of a lot of the early reality competitions from the late 90s, early 2000s. Maybe it's just because I have more of a mind for strategy, but I really feel as if I could have gone into The Circle and did a way better job, or really tanked a lot of people's games, because most of these people are not thinking strategically. Anyway, so the whole point is, getting back to the game, you present yourself as either yourself or a catfish on the social media called The Circle. You're stuck in an apartment, isolated by yourself. You have no face-to-face contact. It's all through messaging. So you set yourself up a little profile, you message people, you create group chats, and then at the end of whatever certain time period they have, you will rank all of your fellow contestants in The Circle from 1 to 8. And so what ends up happening is they score everyone's rankings and come up with a finalized list after all 8 people have ranked. Whoever are the top 2 ranked people, which generally speaking in this game is the people who you like the most, they become the influencers. And the influencers, together in another private room, but they don't see each other face to face. They get this, it's like this little private room with a special dinner. It's almost kind of like a date in a sense. So, they get together in the room and decide who it is they are going to block from The Circle, which inevitably is their eviction. So they get booted from the apartment, and before they leave, as a part of their final boot, they get to have a small bit of private face-to-face contact with any player they want. Could be a player they loved, a player they hated, a player they were curious if they were a catfish. It's actually all really interesting. But yes, fair warning to people, this game is pretty freaking vapid on the surface. I feel like that is just the best descriptor of what this show is. So I would suggest watching season 1. It's a fun little game, and I think everyone truly is pretty likable. So now we are going to dive into season 2, finally. Oh, actually, one other thing I completely forgot. So, as a player is eliminated, so when the 8th player, or the first player of the 8 is eliminated, they bring in another player to replace them. And I believe, if I remember correctly from season 1, they get some sort of little grace period where they are immune from being blocked from The Circle. But honestly, this whole thing is not really fair. I think The Circle has a lot of flaws. It could legitimately be something that is really fun and really good. But it has flaws like that, because ultimately all these other people that constantly are entering The Circle, because I feel like they enter, aside from the original 8, they end up letting an additional probably 6 to 8 people enter The Circle. But all those people are at a wild disadvantage, because the original 8, they had days to get to know each other. And so it's not really fair. You're essentially playing a losing, game at that point. But anyway, so I think that's the last bit of information that I needed to tell you about the game. So anyway, let's dive into Season 2, Episode 1. So, not a whole lot has happened. It's really just an introduction of the characters. And so, I'm sorry, another small little tidbit is this is one of Netflix's first shows to release on a week-by-week basis, but instead of doing one episode, they release 4 at a time, and I think there's usually about 12 to 16 episodes, so it's done over the course of a month. So the first 4 episodes are up, but I actually have only watched episode 1. Anyway, third time's the charm. Now getting to talk about Season 2, Episode 1, we have the 8 new players. We have Savannah. She is a data researcher from Los Angeles. She's 24 years old. She's got that very, glamorous girl, vibes on the surface because she's, really pretty and the way the photos she decides to upload and stuff like that. But she also, her data researcher job, I believe, is in relation to Capitol Hill or something like that. So, and she's also really smart, and you get to learn that she was, on a national robotics team when she was in school as well. She likes Sudoku and 2000s R&B. She, so far, I really liked her this episode. I think she has the possibility to make it very far, if not win. We also learned that she came from a single-parent household, which will factor into another player that we'll be talking about. So the next player that we have is Jack. Jack seems a little odd. He is 20 years old. He's an astro-freaking-physics student. But he plays as one of his best friends, Emily, so he is the first catfish to surface. He said that he researched his role by binge-watching chick flicks and selling Sunset, and he wants to go down as the biggest villain in Circle history. This guy is an idiot. If you have to watch chick flicks to get to know another human being and stereotype them that way, you're already an idiot. Also, in addition to that, the fact that he wants to be the biggest villain in the Circle history, I don't think he's going to actually end up playing a villainous game. I think he's just going to have trouble trying to pretend to be a girl, although I think he'll be one of the more successful catfishes in the game based on the other catfish that we've seen so far. Yeah, I don't have high hopes for him. I think he could make it far, but I do not see him being a winner. Then we have Bryant. Oh, goodness. Brian is 26 years old. He's got shaggy hair. He's got this whole, New Age guru vibes. His literal first appearance in the show is he's praying over his water and, talks about, love and living over many lifetimes and loyal. He seems so freaking pretentious. It's sickening. Now, maybe he really is like this. He seems like he is a genuinely nice guy, and you get to learn about, how he really helped his one friend from living on the streets, and he raised $10,000 for her to get her own place and kind of get herself back on her feet. He does seem like a really nice guy, but he's so over the top. There's no way he'll win this game playing as himself. Yeah, he needs to tone himself down, really. I don't see him winning. Maybe he'll make it somewhat far just because people think he is genuinely a nice guy, but he's not going to be that guy that people are going to love above and beyond. So then we have Delisa. Delisa's 32. She's a mom from the Bronx, and she's actually playing as her husband, Trevor. She is pretending to be single and a single dad at that, which factors into her relationship with Savannah. So pretty early on, another contestant kind of clocked him, and Savannah kind of clocked him as well, but after the whole single parent, conversation, Savannah is now easing up on her skepticism, but Delisa's trying to be too much of the kind single dad, and she's also I don't think she's really using outdated lingo. I mean, she's freaking 32 years old. She's not fucking 50. Oh, excuse my language. She's not 50. Yeah. Anyway, so some people just thought it was a little weird, her word choices. Then we have Terralisha. Terralisha's 34 years old, so she's currently the oldest player of the ones so far. She's got blue hair. She's a substitute teacher. She says she came up with her own mathematical theorem that's named after her. She has a highly attuned catfish meter, and so it almost just seems like very generic, like, oh, I'm going to sniff out the catfishes. But the funny thing is that Terralisha really was immediately skeptical of Trevor by, Delisa's catfish persona. I like her so far. She seems to be playing the game, playing it smart, but also is pretty perceptive. Then we have Lee, who now is officially the oldest player. He is 58. He's an author from Texas, and he's playing as his younger friend River, who is very much like hippie-ish. Huge fro of hair, and he says that when he was, or he is a writer, but when he was writing a lot of books, he would often write under a female pen name. And so he says that, as a writer, I guess he's a, professional liar. So that is why he's playing a catfish of a young, gay hippie named River, which could potentially spark, Brian and River. But I think automatically Lee's persona as River has more potential. Because it is a persona and it is not something that he necessarily has ingrained, so he can be a little bit more adaptable in how he portrays himself. Then we have Courtney, 28 years old. He hosts a online celebrity gossip show, but he doesn't want players to know that. He's slightly altering his own personal profile and saying that he's a barista, and so that kind of makes him half a catfish. That's what he said. But he also says that he oftentimes gets mistaken for the B word, and but he's not really that way. Then we have Chloe. She's 21. She's from the UK, and she is most well known for competing on a Netflix dating show called Too Hot to Handle. Now, I don't watch that. I don't like the dating shows. They are the worst of the worst reality shows or reality competitions. But I know a lot of people that like them. Whatever. Everyone's got their vices. I saw my sister watch this a little bit. So she was pretty excited, the fact that Chloe was going to be in the season, and immediately a number of players knew exactly who she was. She is already painted herself as a huge target. She's flirting with the catfish Trevor. She really thinks that there's some relationship sparking, but I just get the feeling that's her. She's way too easily attached to people. She's a very pretty girl, and I think that might also factor into people not exactly liking her. Could be a thing of jealousy. Oh, look, the hot girl's flirting with all these guys and she's trying to get in good. So she has a good-ish social game, but I think also her being way too likable and way too flirty is what's going to ultimately cost her this game. I don't think people are necessarily starstruck by her. Then we have... Oh, no, wait, that's it, actually. Yeah, that is the entire cast. Just to kind of go over very, very, very brief little notes, because like I said, for the most part, the first episode is just getting to know people. As I've said, on the surface, this show is pretty vapid, and it can get ridiculous at times. But it's still kind of fun. I feel like there's a number of spots where the edit is becoming a little too obvious on who's going to potentially be a boot, who's going to potentially make it far, and maybe even as early as reading a winner's edit for this season. Not a bad start. I do like the Trevor and Chloe relationship. I think it's kind of funny, and but I think both of them are not going to make it far. I think they'll be out early to mid-game. They will not make it far in the mid-game or even make it far in the game. And then I also really like Courtney, Emily, that's Jack's catfish. Bryant to an extent. I think they're all smart people, and I think Savannah is too. Right now, Savannah is my winner pick. But also at the same time, for me, kind of liking Bryant because I do kind of think he's a little smart. I just can't stand the pretentiousness. Anyway, I think I've rambled on long enough. We'll be back another podcast to talk more about The Circle. But on that note, we're going to be taking a short break, and when we come back, we will be now talking about Manifest.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. Keith keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
All right, and we are back. So, we just talked about the first episode of Season 2 of The Circle, which once again is on Netflix. You can also watch Season 1 there. They're all pretty easy watches. It's a reality competition pretty much about social media. So definitely check it out. I will definitely continue to talk about The Circle through the upcoming podcasts as the season will also quickly come to a close as quickly as it started. Anyway, moving on, we have Manifest. So we're going to be talking about episode 2, season 3 of Manifest. Kind of a lot has happened, and also not so much has happened, but at least one interesting thing has happened, which we'll kind of talk about last. So we'll just kind of go in episode, the way that the episode progressed. So obviously, the cliffhanger for last episode was that the meth heads had re-emerged from the lake. And the episode more or less starts out with a park ranger notifying the police precinct that someone had surfaced. They literally came from the water and got caught on one of the webcams. And so that note was placed on Michaela's desk. So we now know that it has been 84 days since their disappearance. So if once again we were in mid to late winter, we should be about mid to late spring right now. I assume at this point, actually, the school year is probably done for the kids because there's really no mention of school, especially given that, oh goodness, I can't remember his name, but Olive's love interest from last season has gone on a little sabbatical of his own, or I don't know if you'd really call it sabbatical, because I think he was on break from college anyway. So, no, I would definitely call it sabbatical. He had to have been in the middle of his semester, his winter semester, or spring semester, however you want to call it. But anyway, that's beside the point. So they reemerged. The meth heads are a little confused as to what the heck is going on, because one moment they're freezing in the lake, and then the next moment they literally are surfaced and everything's fine, and it is really warm. Then we also have Jared comes into the picture for a second to talk to Michaela, because it's been Michaela's first official day back, because she had been on her honeymoon for like 3 freaking months. And we have a little moment between them where Michaela notices that Jared got promoted to lieutenant. And that's kind of the extent of Jared's role in this episode. And there's no way that him being lieutenant is going to be, something minor, something that's quickly glanced over. I really think that is going to play a much larger role in this season to come, because we also don't know how much longer Manifest will be on. It could do, I don't think season 3 will be its final season, because if it was, I think we would have heard about it. And as far as I know, the ratings and the viewership is still pretty high. So I think, realistically, we have another season of Manifest, maybe even 2 more seasons of Manifest, although I don't really see how they can carry the mystery on for another 2 seasons. So I think if they don't end it this season, next season should be the thing. Anyway, point being, Jared got promoted to lieutenant, and I think that's going to play a much larger role in this season to come, as I'm sure with his promotion comes more responsibilities and more privileges. So, we also had Drea sort of get reintroduced. She was in the last episode as well. So, for those who don't remember, Michaela's partner is Drea. But they had this really weird interaction where they were like overly excited to see each other, like they were almost children who went the whole summer of not seeing each other and now they're finally back together at school. It's just really weird because we never really got the idea that they were that close. Now, I know it's a feeling that I'll probably never know, but they say that, you know, in like the armed forces, you know, military, police, anything like that, any sort of like brotherhood, sisterhood sort of thing, you know, there is that bond, but we really never got that vibe from their relationship, and they really didn't actually work together that long before she even got married and went on her honeymoon. So it's just a very strange moment, and I know I wasn't the only one. I saw other people make comments about that. Even the person I watched it with immediately looked at me and was like, what? So, anyway, moving on, Michaela gets the notice, and her and Drea, you know, kind of, you know, investigate after they review the footage and see that they are back. Which then they end up warning the whole Stone family that they are back and they could be seeking revenge against Cal. So we got this little moment where Drea and Michaela, you know, they are investigating the scene, and obviously one of the meth heads has killed someone camping, and we now know that they were super confused through the dialogue that was delivered from the surviving camper, because once again they stole the RV. We just got a lot of weird moments of the meth heads being super confused, and it was kind of interesting, but it also was not as crazy as you would think it would be, especially after someone lost literally 3 months of their lives. I mean, we got that definitely with the 828 people, but also I guess I can't remember the extent of their reaction. But anyway, there was also a chase between Drea and Michaela where she does this like major whip of the car to follow them once they finally pass them. And then they throw a propane tank, which I'm no expert, but it exploded upon impact, which maybe is possible, but it really does not seem to be very possible that it's going to explode, which then causes them to crash and the meth heads to get away. So, I mean, for the plot, yeah, this is just a plot device for the meth heads to escape. So, on the flip side of things, we have the Stone family were warned by Michaela that the meth heads are back, so they all need to go into hiding. So, we now get wind of a new character named Tariq, who happens to be Grace's brother. I don't know if that's her adoptive brother or what, because they don't really dip into Grace's background or her parents or anything like that. Grace herself seems to be possibly a person of color. Tariq, as we find out, is definitely a person of color. He's much, much darker than Grace. But also, the Stone family is relatively white, especially Cal. Olive has a little bit darker skin, and when we had the young version of Olive in the flashbacks as well as the premiere, she was also kind of darker skinned as well. It's just really weird that if you're coming from a biracial family that you would have a twin, no less, like Cal, who's pretty white, and then Olive, who's a little bit darker, and Grace, who's a little bit darker, and then Tariq, who's pretty dark. So I don't really understand the relationship between that, and I hope that's something that we get to dive into more, because there is a mystery about them, which we'll get to in a bit. So they decide that Tariq is the best place. Tariq's house is the best place to go, even though they had a falling out. Ben needs to go deal with the Vance situation, and Olive and Angelina. Angelina's been having these crazy visions for months, if not even the year and a half that she's been home from 828, and she's not been able to dive into. Although I don't really think it's been that long, so it's probably been maybe a couple months. So yeah, Olive gets really upset, like, you guys don't think I can do this, and blah, 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 and it's like, dude, there's guys that are literally trying to potentially kill your brother. I think they're literally just looking out for your protection. But, I mean, this is the thing with Olive. She feels very left out because even the mom had the calling for a little bit as well. So they allow her to do it, and Ben's like, all right, well, why go do my thing? You guys go do your thing, and then we'll meet up, and then we'll meet up with Cal, the new baby, and Grace. So Angelina's been having visions of this demon or angel of death, I guess you could say, which she remembers that in the, I guess the Catholic school that she went to, they had a stained window of the angel of death, which also at the end of her vision is when the angel of death crumbles into glass. So that was kind of an interesting little tidbit. So they finally go to the place, and lo and behold, the angel of death is up there, and it has the peacock wings. Now, I don't really think they've yet to mention what the peacock wings are, or the peacock in general. I think it was just a symbol of an astrological sign. But it's been so reoccurring that it has to factor into the bigger picture at play. We just don't really know what that bigger picture is. So she talks about how there was a time capsule out here, and Olive convinced her to dig up the time capsule, and then they uncover a photo. It's really like her last possessions in this world that she has. And so you could see that she's at this ice cream stand, and there's this little boy in the background. It's pretty clear. I mean, it's what they want you to see. And so that's kind of where they end. They decide that they're going to go to the ice cream shop, though, and get an ice cream, because she's also been pretty emotionally and mentally distraught for a while. On the flip side of things, Ben meets up with Samvi, who shows her the burns, and she takes samples of the burns, and then Zeke's there, and Zeke and Samvi have a couple moments. Not really anything too big. I feel like their relationship in this episode was very minor, but Samvi has been distraught for a while, obviously because of the death of the Major, but it's just really weird that it's like Zeke notices something's wrong with her, which personally you just read her body language and the way she talks and you can tell if there's something wrong with her. And Samvi's like, how is it that, for 3 months now or for months no one's been able to notice what you just were able to notice in a matter of like a minute or something like that? And it almost makes me think that they're alluding to Zeke having some sort of power now that he doesn't have the calling, so a different one. But as we do know from his blood samples, which was the whole reason he was there with Samvi, that he does not have any traces of the anomaly in his blood, or he's not received any callings or anything like that. But I think, honestly, most of these characters are, in a sense, a little bit self-absorbed, but more so they're really just focused on everyone in their family and themselves rather than the other people. So I think that's the more realistic, thought process behind it. But I'm actually really interested to see a Zeke and Samvi relationship, because we haven't seen anything, I guess, with them before, and Zeke's majority of his storyline has just been Michaela and Jared. So I would like to see a shift, see an unlikely pair start to form a relationship, and I'm obviously not talking about romantic. Although they could potentially have a romantic relationship, as we do know from what the creator of the show said right after season 2, that Samvi would develop a relationship that people would find a little bit less unlikely, although I still think it's possibly the Major's daughter. That's my official guess. Anyway, Ben talks to Ben gets hit up by the FBI and everything about, his little trip, and obviously there's a lot going on, and there's no way that he'll be able to hide leaving the country and coming back in the country. But a guy Agent Powell mentions something about "and the truth will set you free." Ben goes on his little adventure to talk to Vance's wife, and there's a hidden message in the ring about the truth, and it leads to the gravestone, which is "and the truth shall set you free," where Ben goes, and Agent Powell's there. And Agent Powell finds out that Vance has not been dead, as many of the people have thought for the past season and a half, because he faked his death halfway through season 1. So that was kind of Ben's story. So then we have, going back to the meth heads, they are talking and, talking about the good times and how they shouldn't be on the run, and maybe this whole coming back to life is a second chance on life. And so the brother convinces the main meth head, well, he doesn't convince him, but he makes him, reminds him of this time where he used to work at this job, and how, I guess it was like smally, or family run or locally run, and it's not some big franchise, so the safe combination's probably the same. So they decide that they're going to go there and rob it. So, what a surprise. That happens to be the ice cream shop. So, who's the little boy in the background? So anyway, Angelina and Olive are there. She drops the photo. There's some really corny dialogue about brain freeze and stuff like that. Angelina has already done a 180, which I find to be a little unrealistic. I think, she might be loosening up a little bit just because she's returning to some sense of normalcy, and she's not really having the calling anymore, which is probably really potentially helping her just relax, or potentially can even go to sleep again because she had trouble sleeping. But she drops the photo, the meth heads go there to go rob the place, and the youngest brother finds the photo and is like super attached. And then the calling, they all get hit with the calling, like, find her, find her, find her, which they're obviously talking about Angelina because she's in the photo. But the police are coming, so 2 of the meth heads leave, but the youngest brother stays behind because he knows that he's got to listen to the calling. And that was their first calling, too. But the police arrive, they arrest the brother. He says that the photo's his because he's in the photo. So, little twist there. Not really a twist, though. I mean, come on, we all kind of knew that was happening from a mile away. And then Olive and Angelina come back to look for the photo. Michaela and Drea are there, and there's the revelation that, boom, in the photo was the older brother, the meth head, at the ice cream stand, the younger brother in the background of the photo looking at the girl, and the girl there. So we got that little interesting tidbit, I guess. I guess to wrap things up, on the other side of things, we have Grace and Tariq. She goes there, and he's so angry at her about her kind of abandoning him when he needed her the most, especially because that's how what's family's supposed to do. And so we got this really interesting little tidbit between them, and after like another 2-minute scene, their relationship's almost repaired because Cal plays basketball with him, which is supposedly a sign that he wants to talk, but he's still angry. So we had this really interesting new dynamic, and we had this really interesting new little mystery and, more character depth. And this is the exact thing that I've been talking about in the show, is that they're missing these interesting character elements. And it's already kind of resolved. Like, this should have been a multiple episode arc. It's so frustrating. I don't understand why they do this. We still don't know what happened, so I mean, we at least have that, but this tension on the relationship and the possibility of it being repaired should be something that needs to be stretched out. And I know these seasons are a little bit shorter, but it should not be done in almost one episode. It's so sad. Yeah. Anyway, ending it, little cliffhanger at the end. We had the glow. Samvi closes up shop, and Ben's hand sample glows, and so does a handprint on the tail, which the whole world now knows the tail fin's been found. So that traps Olive and Ben in the home, which kind of gives them a layer of protection, but it separates them from the rest of the family. So, if anyone copies that handprint because it's glowing, they might be able to find out that the fingerprints that were on the tail fin are actually Ben's. So, interesting little cliffhanger there. It gives this, like, radiation-type glow, so I'm very curious to see where that's going. Anyway, on that note, we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about The Queen's Gambit, episodes 1 through 4.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we are back. So, we have already talked about Season 2, Episode 1 of The Circle, and we have also talked about Season 3, Episode 2 of Manifest. So, we're now going to shift to The Queen's Gambit. More specifically, I'll probably be talking about episodes 1 through 4. It was a 7-episode miniseries. So, I've already kind of given a brief overview and discussed the show on the last podcast. But, for anyone that maybe didn't hear, I'll keep it very, very brief. So, The Queen's Gambit stars Anya Taylor-Joy, has a couple other really famous people too, like Thomas Sanger Brody Sanger? Oh, goodness. Yeah, I think I got it right the first time. But anyway, so it stars this girl named Elizabeth Harmon, and she is an orphan, and she's a little bit dull and lost in life, and so she discovers the love of chess, and she comes from a mother who is clearly a savant. She's very, 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 very smart, so she's inherited this as well, and it's just kind of her journey to become the best champion or chess champion of the world. So anyway, diving into the first episode. So the first episode we also kind of touched upon a little bit. It's a very interesting episode, though. It actually doesn't have Anya Taylor-Joy as Beth, because it has a very, very young version of Beth right after her mother had died, and she doesn't really know who her father is. So she is sent to an orphanage, a Christian orphanage or Catholic orphanage. I'm not really sure which is which, but as a all-encompassing term, we'll say Christian orphanage. There, because it's the 1950s, they often gave the girls a lot of medication, but more specifically tranquilizers. Through that, Beth realizes that when her mind is calmed a bit, she has the ability to what's the word I'm looking for? She has the ability to think more clearly. Let's just say that. And so when she is thinking more clearly, which typically she holds on to the pills at night, and she takes them before she goes to sleep. And so what she ends up doing is she ends up visualizing a whole chessboard, and she runs through scenarios, and she runs through games. She practically has an eidetic memory, which is, oh gosh, I wish I had one. But it's really fascinating, though. And I mean, that whole special effect that they did to project, so to speak, the chessboard on the ceiling is quite fascinating. A friend of mine who is into visual effects, he actually pretty much does that for a living. He also runs a YouTube channel where he recreated that, and it was really cool. Takes a lot of time. There's no way I could, ever do something like that. But anyway, the most important thing about this episode, though, is that it shows you, Beth as a child and being lost. Her introduction to the love of chess, but even more so, her pill addiction, which is something that really plays out for the whole series, But at the end of the episode, because of a new state or federal law, they no longer give the children the tranquilizer pills anymore. And so kind of causes Beth to go through a bit of withdrawal, and leading to a point of her breaking into the medicine room to steal the medicine. So it's very interesting. Anyway, so we go to episode 2, which is kind of, I believe it's like another 5 or 6 years into the future. So I believe she was 9 in the first episode, and they don't really mention age a whole lot in the show. I think it's literally mentioned 3 times, in 3 pieces of dialogue. So I think they did mention it in the first episode. She was 9 years old. In the second episode, I believe she's 15, but to help her get adopted, she poses as someone who is 13, I believe. Maybe 14. Yeah, I think it's 13, though. But anyway, and she's already really smart. She's got good grades. And so this lovely couple adopts her. And very quickly, you get the feeling that the husband is very disgruntled. He's sort of apathetic with his relationship with the wife. And very quickly after Beth is adopted, that whole relationship crumbles apart, and they separate. And plus, he's on the road all the time with work, which makes things really awkward for Beth, and you feel really bad for her because she almost kind of has a very blank personality to begin with, and then the little moments where she does start to feel things like that sort of awkwardness she feels. But she also feels this intense gratitude that she can finally have her own room and have her own things and stuff like that. So you feel really bad for her. Something actually that I also forgot to mention about the first episode is her relationship with Mr. Scheibel, who is the janitor who got her into chess to begin with. But anyway, so in that second episode, you can tell that there are these hesitant relationships that are forming. You don't really know the extent in which her and the adoptive father are going to play a role, but you quickly get that it's going to be practically non-existent as he leaves his wife. But even the mom, they start to dip into her backstory and how, she's a bit sick, and she once had a child who would be Beth's supposed age at this point, which that was, I guess, their marriage solution. Let's get a kid. This kid would have been the same age as our kid before that kid passed. So it's going to fix everything, which is something that a lot of people do. They think a kid's going to make them feel, fix their relationship until they realize it doesn't, or until that child goes off to college and then they're like, well, there's no reason why we should be together anymore. So it's just another one of those situations. At this point, we're also in the 1960s. So anyway, the mom is sick. They don't really tell you what she has. She does drink a fair amount. She also takes some pills, which, lo and behold, is the tranquilizer pills. So that is a bit of a temptation for Beth as she also starts to steal pills from the mom. She puts herself through a tournament that she gets money from Mr. Scheibel, and she does really well. She wins, actually, is really more the answer. But through this tournament, you get to meet some of the other key players. You get to meet the twins who are dealing with all the registration and the game forms. You get to meet Harry Beltic, who is in that area or that state is the champion. He's the state champion or the local champion. I think it's a state champion. Yeah, it's the state champion because I think they live in Minnesota. But he doesn't take Beth seriously, especially given that she's a girl, because they really don't take women chess players seriously because they're pretty much non-existent anyway. Plus, it's sort of a product of the time. So he purposely shows up late to the match, he wastes all of his time, and Beth beats him. Now, given how inexperienced Beth was at this point, there is a chance that she could have lost that. But she reminds me of, like, Goku or something from Dragon Ball Z, where the more she fights, the more she learns. You know, even in her defeats, that's when she learns the most. And she's quick to temper when she gets defeated, too. So anyway, Harry Beltic, I mentioned in the last podcast, he's played by the guy who plays Dudley Dursley. I think it's his name. From the Harry Potter movies. Harry Potter's, annoying, bratty cousin. But he's very, very, very different. And also, the other key player is you get to meet Towns. He is probably in his late 20s, if I had to guess. And he, Elizabeth takes sort of a bit, she fancies him. We'll call it that. She fancies him. And you could tell that from pretty early on. So by the end of the episode, you also got a little bit of a relationship between the mom as she figures out that, holy crap, Elizabeth really is smart, and she won this tournament, and she made money? So I think that kind of sparks an interest that almost seems sort of greedy and very much acting of self-interest for the mom. But also you got some high school dynamics for Beth too, where she kind of gets bullied for the clothes because she shops at like the bargain area because they don't have money, especially with the adoptive father leaving her. So anyway, some other interesting stuff happens. By the third episode, she starts to develop more of a personality. She doesn't exactly become, a sponge absorbing everything around her, devoid of motion or whatever. She has this really interesting relationship with the mom, and they start to, go on this journey together as they go to the US Open, and it's small, but you can already see the budding relationship between them, as they've now at this point been together for probably 6 months, maybe more. And she becomes Beth's manager in a sense. While they're at the US Open, there's another player who gets introduced, and his name is Benny, who's played by Thomas Sanger Brody. So that tournament ends in a draw, which at this point, aside from Mr. Scheibel, is Beth's first loss. And from what we know with Benny's character, that is one of his first losses at the US Opens, or at least that we know of. He's lost at other tournaments like the World Tournaments, but also I guess it's not exactly a loss as it's a draw. So you get the introduction of their relationship. You get the fact that Beth, went on to do something really big, a U.S. Open, and a female player at that, and her reputation is already spreading like wildfire. It's kind of funny, there's this moment when, right at the beginning of the tournament, she goes to one of the tables, and she introduces herself as Beth, and the guy's just like, oh, crap, because he knows he's going to lose. Which is just kind of funny, because, like, if he's afraid of her, then he really should be afraid of Benny, who has got a huge reputation in the United States, like, chess world. But I guess he was hoping that he'd make it further in the tournament and not get out one of the first rounds. So that's really it, I believe, for episode 3. There's not a whole lot. Episode 4, though, I mean, they've all been really good episodes, but episode 4 was really good because we got an even further elaboration of Beth and her adoptive mother. It's actually really sweet because not only has she been managing her career for a little bit at this point, I'd say, actually, they're in Mexico now, and I think it's been like over a year later. So, it could be even longer than that. Yeah, like I said, dates and ages is not something they often discuss. But they've been together, I'd say, for at least a year. It could be upwards of 2 years at this point. And it's been a while since the U.S. Open. So you get to see this, the furthering of their relationship. And but you can also see the mother's health declining a lot. Now, it was also briefly introduced in episode 2 that she loves to play the piano and she would have loved to play professionally because she's really talented and she likes it, but she gets stage fright. Now, that's also another moment that you get. You know, you can see that the mother's health is worsening, and you can see her further, you know, going down with drugs and alcohol, you know, not recreational drugs, like she legitimately has to take medicine for her health, but there's also the smoking and everything, and so she finally gets the courage to do it, and it's this really nice, like, cathartic moment for her, and you get to see her evolve as a character, and Beth is even happy for her, and she has a little pen pal in Mexico. And so she kind of splits her time up between Beth and this pen pal, you know, and she has these wonderful nights out. So Beth is, for the most part, left alone a lot. She gets to meet up with Towns again, who she was not expecting to be there. Ooh, no, she met Towns in the last episode, and then in the last episode it was kind of revealed, but not outright revealed, that Towns was gay. And there was this weird moment before they kind of reveal that it almost makes it seem like something's going to happen between the two of them. But I think it's more so that was Beth's imagination that was kind of creating that for us. But anyway, so in Mexico, she doesn't really have anyone until she sees the twins from episode 2. So that was really interesting, and they have all this fun. You get to actually see her enjoying herself, almost being a kid. At this point, she's about 16 or 17, and you just love her relationship, and it's a non-romantic relationship. It's purely friendship, and it was great to see her having fun with the twins. But she's also really stressed because the world champion is also at this international tournament. And she's very, very, very... Ooh, I apologize. My mind is all out of whack. Beth is 17 or 18 at this point because the beginning of the episode started off with her graduation and the mom getting to see there. So it's actually been a couple years between, you know, the first couple episodes to episode 4 in Mexico. Anyway, I so apologize. But yeah, so, yeah, you love this relationship between her and the twins, but she's also really dedicated to potentially beating the world champion, you know. She thinks that this is what her journey's been leading to, is right here. Which, I mean, as an audience, we know that that's not the case. She's not going to beat the world champion yet. And she does lose, and she gets angry, which kind of makes it known that she has a reputation for getting angry at a loss. And this is really the first true loss that she's had aside from her tie with Benny. So she was also really upset because her mother said that she was going to be there, especially after spending all the time with her boyfriend. And so despite her not showing up for the tournament, she goes up to the room. She's in a kind of a better mood at this point, and she starts talking to the mom to realize that the mom is dead. And so it's kind of the start of a downward spiral for her. She notifies the husband, because I don't think they're officially divorced, just because of the way that things were back in the 1950s and 60s. And the husband says that she'll let her have the house. You know, she'll continue to pay, or he'll continue to pay for it, and she just has to do what she has to do. She can pay the rent or whatever. And that is more or less the end of those 4 episodes. But the big takeaway is that you had a blank slate like Elizabeth, who discovers something that she's passionate about. She knows that she's smart, which she probably got from her mom, and her mom is already really troubled mentally. And so she finally gets, you know, some semblance of a normal life. And it's really sad that it ends up getting taken away from her, which you really do get the feeling this is the start of her downward spiral. And maybe the same thing that happened to her mom might be happening to her. So anyway, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll be talking about The Wilds, episodes 1 through 3.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back. So, we have already talked about Season 2, Episode 1 of The Circle, we've talked about Season 3, Episode 2 of Manifest, and we have talked about the first 4 episodes of The Queen's Gambit. So, just like I had said with The Queen's Gambit, and what I had said with last podcast, I would be coming back to revisit The Wilds as well. Now, I'm going to probably just be talking about episodes 1 through 3. It is a 10-episode season. If you're interested in this show at all, you can find it on Amazon Prime. And also, if you're interested at all in any of the other shows, you can find Queen's Gambit on Netflix. You could find The Circle on Netflix as well. And you can find Manifest on ABC or on Hulu as it comes on the day after. So, just kind of diving right into The Wilds. So, each episode of The Wilds has a centric character, very similar to how Lost used to do it, in which there would be a problem that would, occur on the island, because it's the same thing with The Wilds as it was with Lost, and each character would get a flashback only on the episode, or not a single flashback, but only one character would get flashbacks during the episode as a way to kind of relate what is going on to the island as what happened in their own personal life. Now, the difference with The Wilds starting out is that The Wilds has a present, a recent past, and a past, I guess you could just say. I'm just going to call it its past. But with that, though, the majority of the show takes place in the recent past, or at least the first season does. Who knows if they end up, or when they release the second season, because it is confirmed, when that season will take place, or what it'll even involve. Anyway, so I kind of want to generally just stick to the characters in which the episodes feature. So we have in episode 1 we have Leah, in episode 2 we have Rachel, in episode 3 we have Dot. So I'll start off with Leah because obviously it's the first episode and she is the closest thing that this show has for a main character, although this show is definitely another one of the ensemble cast shows. So from my personal opinion, I think that Leah's character is bland. I hate to say that. Her character is bland, but she's moldable, and her story completely revolves around love and being a little bit broken from that love, but broken because she's no longer with that person. So from all of these different elements, everyone's kind of felt this at one point or another, whether it was love or whether it was, infatuation or whatever you want to call it. So I think given these elements and also giving the moldable element, it allows for, odds are its demographic being, teenage girls, to kind of easily relate to her. Now, you don't really get from her first episode that she's compulsive or obsessive, not compulsive, it's a little bit compulsive too, but more obsessive. You don't really get that in the first episode. You get that as the season goes along, and definitely by the time you're at the midpoint, she's pretty obsessive. But yeah, I do think that with those standard traits, it makes her easily relatable, or people can really fill in the blanks with her character and say, oh, I'm like this, which is fine. It's a thing that writers do for a lot of these shows. I think also her character in doing the love story, it's the same issue with Bridgerton, in which you have a story that's general, it's standard, it's been done, but you have a standard story mixed with something that's a little bit more unique, and it safely hooks in audiences without doing anything too wild or extreme that could potentially isolate or turn away your demographic. So that's Leah for episode 1. Now, in episode 1, it's all day 1 of them being on the island. Now, you get a little bit of her interrogation by the FBI, which, like I said, is technically the present, although you could argue that it would be the future, but I mean, it's the present, because we're seeing most of the story in the recent past. So, you know that from the island, Leah survives. But you get introduced to all the characters. They're all on the plane. The plane goes down, and most of the women or teenage girls crash or land very close to the island, to a point where they can just easily swim ashore, whereas Leah was out in the middle of the ocean by the majority of the wreckage with Jeanette. Now, Jeanette is the most positive, kind of fun-ish girl, very, very peppy, and her suitcase is floating nearby, her cell phone rings, and it's like a song of Pink and stuff like that, but she's badly injured. She's got like really bad bruising, and they manage to get ashore. Most of the time, it's them arguing and figuring out what the heck is going on. They set up some of the dynamics between Shelby and Tony, especially as they butt heads, and Tony kind of hurts Shelby too. But the biggest twist is that Jeanette, her internal bleeding, which they mentioned earlier in the episode, where Leah's like, oh, you don't have an elevated pulse or something like that, so it's not internal bleeding, which I never knew that. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's something I actually should look into now that I think about it. But anyway, Jeanette, she does actually die. She dies of internal bleeding, which it's such a shame. She like coughs up blood, she falls, and then she's dead. Which really heightens the severity of everything that is going on in the show. And then they bury her. And they all sing Pink because, Leah knows that Pink was her favorite from talking to her on the plane, as well as her phone going off. And it's really sad, also weird, and yeah, just them singing Pink by her grave as a way to, like, memorialize her. But anyway, so that's kind of it for the first episode. At the end also, there's a phone call, or there's a ringing, and Leah runs to Jeanette's grave and discovers that she had another phone, like a satellite-type phone. Something, it's a normal phone, but just capable of some extra range, so I wouldn't necessarily call it a satellite phone. But she decides to use her one phone call to call her lover, who she's broken up with. Which then she can't even say anything when he answers. Anyway, the second episode, we have Rachel. Now, Rachel, I did not like her. In the beginning of this series, I really didn't like her. She comes off as just angry, and she's the athlete, and she's determined, and she's overly competitive. She's got, like, all the negative traits, she's got most of the negative traits out of all these girls, and she's, really annoying. As she also, the whole story with this episode is that she's trying to find help using Fatten's mirror, because Fatten was really the only one that was actually able to salvage any of her suitcases or supplies and stuff like that. So we end up finding out through Rachel's story she is the second person to survive the island. But yeah, you start to dip into her backstory, and I feel really bad because she has a twin sister who is Nora. Nora is really smart. You can tell from her parents. I believe she has a biracial family. Her parents are also really smart as well. They play these word games, but Rachel's just really not there for it. She's not to say that she's dumb, she's just not as smart as the rest of them. So, to step out of her sister's shadow and differentiate herself to get her parents to pay more attention because they're very academic focused, she is an athlete, but more specifically, she's a swimmer, until she realizes that, from her coach, that as she's growing up and her body's changing and she's getting, bigger boobs, bigger butt, just bigger in general, she's not really made for swimming. Which then causes her to sort of develop, definitely develop an eating disorder. She becomes bulimic in order to, slim herself down to become a better diver, which leads to her getting an injury and then ultimately her leaving the diving team. She banked on this whole thing as her future. And so, you really start to feel bad for her. And this is exactly what shows need to do. They're creating these complex characters. Because in the first episode, or really the first 3 episodes, but more specifically the first episode, the characters come off a little more generic. But once again, I think this is to, attract audience and, really reel in that demographic. But you attract them in with these stereotypes or these generalities, and then you really elaborate on them, and you develop them as 3-dimensional characters. So I start to get a little bit of an understanding with Rachel, but not really feeling it, just because of how angry she is, and how confrontational she is. She's just constantly butting heads with everyone. It just makes it really, really annoying. Couple other key notes. Tony starts to develop a jealousy because her best friend Martha is starting to develop a close relationship with Shelby, who she doesn't already like. Fatten finds her stuff. Nora was excluded from the expedition to use Fatten's mirror to try and signal for help, but she still follows anyway. Leah, once again, this is where her obsessiveness starts to come out. She almost throws herself over a cliff to get the mirror after it falls. And yeah, those are the pretty big points. Oh, and then Leah finds out about, obviously, as we talked about, Jeanette's phone, which then makes a lot of people really mad, but more specifically makes Rachel mad that Jeanette didn't tell him, but also Jeanette was literally dying. And also we know from the end of the first episode, which I forgot to mention, that Jeanette was one of 2 operatives who is spying on the girls and making sure also the girls are safe from any serious harm, but she's dead, so who do they really have looking out for them? But we know that there's a second operative. They also find a bag of medicine, which could really help them, which kind of puts suspicion on Shelby. So then for the third episode, you have Dot. Now, Dot was probably between Dot and Nora, but, not really diving into Nora. We'll get to her when we get to her episode. But Dot was probably the first character that I really liked, because she's that, she's not your typical girl. She's very likable. She's very down to earth. She's sort of multifaceted. So you already like her, from what you can see, and people kind of are starting to look to her. And she also kind of tries to mediate things. But then you get into her backstory, and her backstory, I think, is probably the most heartbreaking of anyone, because her whole story is about her father dying, and, she's kind of already poor as it is, and literally all their money is being sunk into his healthcare. But I don't think they really ever say what his disease is or his illness is. But she's got to do what she's got to do to help pay the cost and pay the bills. So she steals some of her father's medication, nothing that really affects him, and she starts to sell it at school, which she and Shelby went to the same school, and that's how she knows that Shelby's boyfriend was cheating on her. So anyway, she also starts to develop this relationship with her father's nurse. And I get the feeling he's a little bit older than her, as Dot has got to be about 17 or 18, probably 18. He's got to be in maybe his early 20s, little crossing, or at least I believe he'd be in his early 20s, because he does not look young. But then again, none of these girls really look as young as they're playing. So, you got a cute little relationship. Things seem to, be going, but you don't really know if he feels the same back, but then as things come out, they do. And it's nice. It's a safe relationship. It doesn't really feel like it's crossing any lines. Very, unlike the whole Leah and her lover storyline, because he's in his, 30s, and she was only 16 when they started the relationship, although she lied to him and said that, she was 18, but the second he found out that she was 18, she broke it off with him. Or he broke it off with her, my mistake. But yeah, I really like Dot. She's there for family. She loves her father. She's going to do everything that she can. She's doing what she can to do to pay the bills. But by the end, as things get really bad, as things get really bad for her father, he asks her to assist in his suicide, and she's not there, for it at first, that idea, but then she ultimately agrees to it, and she gives him just a little bit too much pain medicine, and he passes away. But now she is 17 or 18, and she's got this house, and she's got no parents, and she's still in school. And then we have, I believe her name was Gretchen. Gretchen is the one who's running this whole operation and offers Dot help, but also to come to this women's retreat, because that's what the whole guise is. That's the whole, idea of, where they were going. They were going to a women's empowerment retreat. So they leave the third episode off, with you thinking that Dot is potentially the other operative. But also we know from the, FBI agents that Dot has been talking to, that she is now the third one alive. So at least those three are alive. You also get from Rachel's backstory that Nora probably is dead, which is a real shame. But you get these hints that some of these people might not be alive and might be dead. I think the biggest two are potentially Nora and Martha being dead, while the rest seem to be alive. So, only time will tell. But anyway, thank you for listening to the GSMC television podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask you that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice little review, because it really helps us out. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much, guys. Have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts podcast network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts podcast network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.